Chapter 2, The First Truth. The world is my womb, and my mother's womb was my first world. R.D. Laing. We gradually begin to think of ourselves in the course of growing up as personalities made up of all the lessons we have learned. Our hard-earned lessons count heavily in our consideration of who we are. We complicate our lives by holding on to these hard-earned lessons long after they have outlived their usefulness. Take, for example, the child who learns to persistently beg his mother in a whiny voice, first for cookies and later for the keys to the car. Since it worked with Mom, and since Dad left most of that up to Mom, he keeps using what works. At age 40, he may still be treating his third wife the same way without having gotten those same results for years. The mind doesn't like to change itself in the face of new information. Lessons learned and held on to in this fashion make up the personality to which we are shackled. This makes life harder than it has to be. The way out of this suffering is to expand who we consider ourselves to be. We must return to being more than the personalities we have shrunk to during the course of growing up. By the time we are old enough to ride a bike, we are personalities. In the course of learning to be personalities, we forget something we knew before we had any vested interest in behaving consistently. That is, the common sense of unity in the womb before we knew we existed. These are my basic premises about how we all began. The earth happened by chance, and chemistry brought us to be. After a long period of evolution, you and I showed up. After about the first 4 or 5 months in the womb, we had our first experience of being, a dawning of consciousness. The first experience we all had was when life came on. Dawn seems to be the best metaphor for this. Dawn happens in a slow and almost indistinguishable way, a long time before sunrise. The light of life came on for us in the same way, a long time before birth. The Hindus call consciousness the light that enlightens the light, or the light that allows us to see light. In the womb is where this light, our consciousness, first occurred. For the first time, we experienced experience itself. It happened like dawn, where the gradual accumulation of light makes it impossible to say when day has happened, but suddenly it is there. That is, we were our first experience. The fetus matured until the wiring was complete, and suddenly experiencing was. What we were in the womb was a unity of experiencing. This unity of experience went on for an eternity. In our time, the time we know about now, it was 4 or 5 months. Then it was an eternity. Then it was eternity. We never forget that time, but we have no way of remembering it in a way we can describe. It is indefinable, unrememberable in any graspable way. All religions, gods, metaphysics, theologies, philosophies, and teachings of masters of all faiths are attempts to remember these eternal months past, this lost sense of unity. Since the beginning of human history, priests have been trying to put this sense of unity into words, trying to communicate about the ineffable. They knew something was there, but didn't know how to talk about it, yet couldn't resist trying. And the more they talked, the more confusion arose between the attempt to define unity and the actual experience of unity. As a result of our inability to put it into words, this experience of oneness, a commonplace experience, has become highly overrated. Enlightenment is knowing unity, not being able to talk about it. The philosophy of enlightenment is talking about or trying to describe the experience of unity. Unity is the nature of things. It doesn't take any work. It is the given. We are each creators of the universe out of our own being. What is given us to experience is a unity within which we make distinctions. The sound we hear when our ears are stopped up is the electrical generator of unity. When our eyes are closed, the darkness we see is the generator of unity. When our eyes are open, whatever we see is who we actually are. As Krishnamurti says, you are the world. From the moment life starts, the being we are constantly creates the world with its senses. The world grows and the mind grows out of this unity. The world is created for us out of our fundamental equipment, our being. We are constantly creating the world by merely perceiving. When we hear, we are creating sound. When we see, we are creating what is seen in our visual cortex. When we integrate sight, sound, smell, touch, balance, movement, etc., our involuntary nervous system creates the world. When we die, for all practical purposes, the world ends. We are, nevertheless, each creators of the world. But since we do it effortlessly, and everybody does it, it doesn't count for much in our considerations of who we are. Usually we consider creating meaning to be more important than creating the world. We take for granted our function as creators of the world and focus much more attention on creating meaning. We are preoccupied with the power of interpretation. We are much more interested in our own uniqueness, derived from what we have worked to learn, than in the source of our power as creators. It is our fate as human beings to grasp after the ineffable, trying to regain a lost sense of unity. Even so, when we do get in touch with unity, the vastness of our being, for a few seconds, we usually run. We feel as if we are about to lose something. We are. We are about to lose the protection and safety of the limited definition of self we have come to think we are. We are afraid of losing who we think we are, which is special, and we are afraid of becoming who we actually are, which is not special. When we become aware of ourselves as indefinable, uncategorizable, simple creators of the world, we lose all certainty. Being present to the immediate moment-to-moment passing of the world, the fragility of our own being, and the relative unimportance of the personality we think we are, is a terrifying experience. Being fully aware of our ever-present, ever-changing existence throws us into the same ineffable state as when the light came on while we were unseeing in the womb. Simultaneous awareness of the life of being and the lesser importance of the personality to which we have become attached is a second enlightenment that comes to all humans who grow up beyond the stage of adolescence. But it feels like dying. To avoid the trauma of it, the great majority of us remain adolescents until the end of our lives. This is not a minor philosophical point. This is the heart of the matter. Most of us would rather kill ourselves than be, particularly if who we think we are keeps dying. Many of us do. The birth of being. Go back for a moment in your imagination and memory to the beginning. There are sounds like intestines rumbling. Sensations are stirring. And there is a vague sense of movement and other sounds, like dolphins calling to each other under the sea. In this beginning, there is no seeing, thus no dark. To the unborn, there is no knowledge of darkness, because there is no light. and no mind to contrast dark and light. Experiences in this unseeing world begin to form the mind. Here, in a background, which is all that we are, which lasts however long we do, we are our beginning. You can go back here any time you like. I often do when I meditate. Much later, a true eternity later, the experiences of birth, light, air, breathing, and pain flood the being. The mind is born out of this ocean of experience before and after birth. Even after 7 months in the womb, the unborn baby is capable of learning to respond in a predictable fashion to outside stimuli, such as sound. Laboratory experiments have found that a 7-month-old fetus will react to an electrical shock to the mother's womb with a full contraction. When this shock is applied along with a loud sound, the fetus is conditioned, after only a few trials, to go into a full contraction at the loud sound, without any electrical shock. An association between the sound and shock is made. Therefore, learning has occurred. So now we know, thanks to evil scientists who have tortured fetuses in this manner, that the mind begins to form associations between ebbs and flows in the ocean of experience prior to birth. This grouping of replicated experiences begins to form the mind. Sometime shortly after birth, we demarcate a little area, a smaller sea, from our ocean of experience. Our mother's breast, our mother, our hand, our body, our clothes, our bed, our room get distinguished for us. We become a sea of suggestions. We grow up all the rest of the way surrounded and protected by this expanding sea of suggestions. And eventually, thousands of refinements later, a group of suggestions becomes who we think we are. Who we actually are, of course, remains always more than the mental images we form while growing up. First, we are the experiencer of what is momentarily present. Second, we are the multisensory recorder of experience. Last, and less importantly, we are the rememberer. Later, we are most focused on remembering our own reputations. But who we always really are, from the beginning, is a context, a parenthesis, a being who creates the world for itself by sensing. We are the being who is the source of being and remembering. Recontacting that basic beginning electrical sensate self rescues us from the mind, the murderer, and potential ally within. Getting born again. As you may recall, we have a lot to deal with in order to grow up all the way to adulthood. After forming a personality and losing touch with the wholeness of being, we then rediscover wholeness, but experience it as a threat to our personality. Personality can eventually be included in the wholeness of being, but not without some hard work that requires courage and takes a while. It is a process of disintegration and reintegration. Some people call it dying and getting born again. The creator being is the being that came alive in the womb at about 4 or 5 months after conception, when the wiring was complete and the light came on. We forget this being rather quickly. In just a few years, we are so surrounded by our creation, the sea of suggestions, we can hardly touch or taste or smell or feel or see the ocean of experience that still surrounds us. We forget we live in a sea that is a part of an ocean at all. We forget we are the source of the whole ocean. Getting born again is remembering that. To summarize, we awaken in the womb into an ocean of experience. Over a long period of time, that ocean of experience becomes a sea of suggestions. We lose track of the ocean of experience. we lose track of having created the sea. After we have lost track of everything sufficiently, we continue to interact with the sea and create a self. What we call the self is a creation of further interactions of the sea of suggestions. The being we were when we began, the being we actually still are, alive in an ocean of experience, including all the ocean as itself, recedes to the background of our attention, and the self we have created comes to the foreground. As we identify with our newly created self, we lose touch with the being we are and have been since the light came on. All religious experiences can be accounted for by a kind of yearning to recapture completely the 4 to 9 month time lapse photograph of being we developed in that eternal time in the womb. A kind of fused multisensory recording made before our senses themselves were distinct, before birth, resides in each of our memories. A remembrance of unity. This undistinguished unity lasts some time past birth until the baby breaks the world into 2 pieces with its first conception based on replicated events. That first conception may have come after being fed at mother's breast many times. At some point, the memory of previous events of warmth, milk, cuddling, sucking, swallowing becomes distinguished from all other memories, and the baby cries to be fed. At that point, if the baby gets fed and remembers it, the next time the baby is hungry and cries again, he or she enters time and a life of increasing distinctions. The global world of experience becomes divided into feeding events and non-feeding events. The unity we all search for, the peace that passeth understanding, and the looked forward to heaven and reunion with God, is a vague but all-pervasive memory of a time of bliss, yearningly remembered from the past and longingly projected toward the future. This yearning for something that can't quite be remembered in the way we usually remember is constantly triggered by the ever-present background experience of being. When we close our eyes and cover our ears, we can hear our own heartbeat and hum. It stimulates remembrances of times past that can't be conceptualized. From thee we come, to thee we go. There is a Zen story about 2 fishes arguing about the existence of the ocean. The first fish says, "It's all around you. You are surrounded by it. You are surrounded by water. You have lived in water all your life." "Show me. Prove it. Where is this ocean?" the second fish demands. This difficulty in being aware of the perpetual, continuous, taken for granted sustenance of being is that it has been there since the first light came on. We have nothing with which to compare it, no measure of its existence. The ever-present ocean of experience has no inside or outside. Inside us and outside us are both inside us. Who we are is the being within which occurs that experience we call inside our body, and that experience we call outside our body. More accurately, we are the inside and outside experience itself, happening. We learn inside and outside an eternity after the light first comes on, because then we had no concept of time, and years after we are born. It takes an eternity plus a couple of years before our minds distinguish inside and outside. The mind is the sea of suggestions we learned as we grew. The mind is born out of the indefinable ocean of experience we first were and still are. The sea of suggestions we come to think we are as personalities is itself in a larger ocean, like the original ocean of experience, currently obscured by the sea of suggestions we consider ourselves to be. To be whole, We must recontact the being we are and were and evermore shall be until the end of each of our times. That being is the creator being, the background hum that keeps us cooking, the basic circuit board, the baseline buzz. The cognitive faculties of the mind are a secondary development for steering, not the primary driving force of life. Minds are developed and lead us away from the experience of being, and religious practices were developed to get us back to it. All religions were developed to help us get back home to the hum we started with. Meditation, sitting quietly until the mind settles down, brings a sense of wholeness. I believe the primary value of meditation is that, while meditating, we reunify the memory of our first sense of being with our current breathing, heart beating, sensate, present tense experience of being. Being a living being, knowing in our bones that we have been being for some time, is the heart of who each of us is. We are beings alive behind the mask of personality. Sitting in the Zendo, a place of meditation, that is what we find when we let ourselves be. Marilyn Ferguson, for years the editor of Brain Mind magazine and the author of The Aquarian Conspiracy, says, "Those who want direct knowledge, the mystics, have always been treated more or less as heretics. Now the heretics are gaining ground, doctrine is losing its authority, and knowledge is superseding belief. Mystics are people who rediscover experience. Belief is the sea of suggestions about who we think we are. The path from doctrine to knowledge is a development beyond doctrine. Psychotherapy was invented to try to keep body and soul together, to help us to not mind being all the time, and to not be minding all the time. In the course of growing to adult size, we all have to learn the roles and rules. In order to do this, we forget, subsume, take for granted, ignore, or drop consciousness of our essential being. The path to the good life leads on further than childhood moralism, but a lot of people don't go that far. The path from doctrine to heresy is a natural growth, a natural evolution, a transition from one level of maturity to another. Very few of us stay on the path, however, because we get so damaged by those who teach us the doctrine. We become so filled with hate and so embroiled in arguments and entangled in the webs of our minds that we stop growing. With rare exceptions, up until and including the present time in history, this has been the case for all human beings. We can no longer afford the luxury of waiting for what might naturally evolve over time, a way to not damage all the children so badly. We are in danger of damaging ourselves to death. The problem, formerly serious, has become critical. The sentimental, idealistic romanticism of deeply felt religious belief, though responsible for the suffering of millions, was relatively harmless until we developed hydrogen bombs and other world-threatening technology. We can no longer afford to sit around in groups together to indulge in a tearful remembering forward of a forgotten hoped-for sense of unity at the direction of various priests and patrolmen who would have us gear up to attack other groups doing the same thing. We must grow beyond where human beings were for all those years of recalling and hoping for paradise. Because of the various doomsday scenarios for the fate of the earth, we must make a sudden advance in consciousness or perish. Unless more human beings expand who they consider themselves to be by re-including what they excluded when they grew a personality, unless more of us grow beyond the ignorant provincialism of adolescence moralizing, the game is over. Like rats behind the Pied Piper, we will follow our leaders off the cliff and back into the sea forever.